The great hall of the alien council was silent. Only the cold light of the high torches flickered against the dark stone walls. Hundreds of eyes watched her, judging her, waiting to see if she would resist. She stood tall, her long silver cloak flowing behind her, but inside her chest her heart beat with anger. They had betrayed her. Her own people had chosen her fate without asking her. She was a daughter of warriors, a woman of a proud house. And yet now, they said, she must marry a human. The council leader raised his voice, his words echoing across the chamber. Your people broke the treaty, and for this crime, we must give a sign of peace, he said. You will marry a human, and through this bond, both races will be tied. His tone was sharp, final, leaving no room for argument. She clenched her fists, every part of her body wanted to scream, but she kept silent. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her beg. A door opened at the far end, and the human entered. He was not dressed in armor or in any display of power. Instead, he wore simple clothes, dark and clean, his face calm. He walked without fear, though hundreds of alien eyes stared at him. He did not bow. He did not boast. He simply stood in front of her. Their eyes met for the first time, and she felt a strange stillness. She had imagined a monster, a savage, or perhaps a coward hiding behind weapons. But he looked different, his eyes steady, his presence quiet. He was not handsome by her people's standards, yet something in him was unshaken. It made her uncomfortable, as if she was the one being measured. Her anger rose again. This man would not see her weakness. She turned her head away, showing only coldness. The council declared the union sealed, the words spoken in both languages. Chains of tradition bound her tighter than iron ever could. She thought of escape, of rebellion, of ways to tear this bond apart. She had promised herself she would never belong to a human. As the ceremony ended, whispers moved through the hall like wind. Some looked at her with pity, others with cruel smiles. Her humiliation was now complete in the eyes of her people. When the hall emptied, she was left standing beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy between them. Finally, the human spoke, his voice calm but firm. I did not choose this either, he said. His words struck her more than she expected. She turned to him, searching his face for mockery, but there was none. His tone carried honesty, and that unsettled her even more. She walked ahead, refusing to let him see her thoughts. Her mind burned with anger, but somewhere inside a seed of doubt appeared. Why did his words sound different from the lies of her counsel? Why did his eyes seem to hold no chains? She shook her head. She would not let such weakness take root. He was human, and she was forced to be his, nothing more. That night in the chamber given to them, she sat by the window. The stars outside burned cold and distant. She thought of her ancestors, warriors who never bowed to any enemy. And now she was trapped in this union, a symbol of shame. Behind her, the human sat quietly, not demanding, not speaking much. He gave her space as if he understood her silence. It made her uneasy, for she had prepared for cruelty, not for patience. At last she turned and asked, her voice sharp, "Do you enjoy this punishment, human?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "No," he said simply, "but I will not dishonor you." His words cut through her anger like a blade. She felt heat rise in her chest, not from rage, but from something else she could not name. She looked away quickly, unwilling to let him see the storm inside her. The night stretched long, heavy with silence. She could not sleep, her mind replaying every moment. The council's cold judgment, the people's whispers, the human's calm eyes. She hated him, yet she could not deny the strength she sensed in him. It was not the strength of weapons or power, but something quieter, deeper, something her people had never spoken of. It unsettled her more than chains ever could. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "I will resist. I will not give in to him." But a small voice inside her asked, what if resistance was not as easy as she thought? And with that thought haunting her heart, The first night of the forced marriage began. The morning after the forced marriage was cold. The halls of the council palace were quiet, and she walked beside the human with stiff shoulders. Every step she took was filled with anger. She wanted to show the world that she was not broken. The human, however, walked calmly, his pace steady, his eyes watching the path ahead. He did not try to touch her. He did not try to command her, and this confused her more than she wanted to admit. They were taken to a small home on the edge of the city, a house prepared for them. Inside it was simple, a few chairs, a table, and 2 rooms. She expected him to claim authority, to take control as her people would have done. Instead, he carried his small bag to the other room and said only, "You may take the larger space." His voice was even, respectful without pride. She frowned, waiting for a trick, but there was none. The days passed slowly, and she tested him in every way she could. She ignored him at meals. She left the chores undone. She spoke to him with sharp words. But he never answered with anger. Instead, he cleaned the dishes himself. He cooked when she refused. He listened in silence when she shouted. His patience felt like a weapon she could not fight. Each time she tried to hurt him, he answered with calmness, and that left her unsettled. One evening, as the sun fell behind the mountains, she found him outside repairing the fence. Sweat covered his brow, but he worked with steady hands. She stood there watching, waiting for him to notice her. When he did, he simply nodded and said, "The fence was weak. I don't want trouble to come near you." Her chest tightened at his words, not because of fear, but because of the quiet way he said them. He did not speak of ownership. He spoke of protection. And that was something she had never expected from a human. The next day, while walking through the market, whispers followed them. Aliens of her kind sneered, laughing that the proud daughter of warriors now walked beside a human. She held her head high, but the insults cut deep. Then one man stepped forward, mocking her aloud, his words cruel. Before she could respond, the human stepped between them, his eyes firm. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but filled with power. The man laughed, expecting weakness, but he found none. The human did not strike. He did not shout, yet something in his steady gaze forced the mocker to step back. The crowd fell silent, and she felt her breath catch. For the first time, she saw others fear a human without him lifting a single hand. That night she could not rest, her thoughts chasing one another. She remembered the way he stood before her, as if shielding her from shame. She remembered his silence when she insulted him, his patience when she tested him, his strength when others doubted him. And though her heart told her to keep hating him, something deeper whispered a different truth. This man was not weak. He was not the monster she imagined. He was something else, something her people had never prepared her to face. The following morning, she tried a different test. She asked him why he never fought back when she treated him with coldness. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be trapped," he said quietly. "I will not add chains where you already carry them." Her breath stilled. Her anger melted into silence. For a long moment, she could not find words, and he walked away without waiting for thanks. She sat by the window after he left, staring at the sky. For the first time in her life, she wondered if her people had been wrong. Wrong about humans, wrong about strength, wrong about the meaning of honor. The thought frightened her, because it meant her heart was beginning to betray her will. She whispered to herself, "I will resist," but her voice lacked the fire it once carried. Each day with him was like standing before a mirror she had never known. A mirror that showed her not weakness, but another kind of strength. And though she told herself again and again that she would never accept him, she knew deep inside that her walls were beginning to crack. What she had thought of as punishment was slowly turning into something far more dangerous. Not chains, not humiliation, but the slow awakening of feelings she had sworn never to feel. The weeks passed, and life in the small house grew into a quiet rhythm. She still spoke little to him, still kept her distance, but her anger had begun to soften. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noticing small details she had once ignored. The way he fixed broken tools without complaint, the way he gave food to the children who begged near the market, the way he faced every insult with calm. It was a strength that did not shout, and that made it more unsettling. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the city, trouble arrived. A group of raiders stormed through the outer gates, armed with blades and fire. The people screamed, shops burned, and chaos filled the streets. She felt her chest tighten, fear pressing against her ribs. Her people were strong, but the guards were slow to respond, and panic spread like fire. She turned to see him, the human, standing with eyes fixed on the smoke. There was no fear in his face, only focus. He grabbed a piece of wood from the broken fence and ran toward the danger. She shouted after him, furious, "Are you mad? You will be killed." But he did not stop, and something inside her moved, pulling her feet to follow. They reached the square where the raiders attacked. A child cried for help, trapped under fallen beams. Without hesitation, he rushed forward, lifting the heavy wood with his bare hands. His muscles strained, his breath short, but he did not stop until the child was free. The raiders saw him, laughed, and drew their blades. She froze, expecting him to fall, expecting him to show the weakness her people always claimed humans carried. But he did not fall. With the wooden beam still in his hands, he struck like a warrior. One raider was thrown back, another stumbled, and the crowd gasped. He moved with no training, no shining armor, only raw will. And yet, in his movements, she saw courage her people had long forgotten. Her heart pounded as she watched, torn between disbelief and awe. One raider slashed his arm, and blood ran down, but he did not yield. Instead, he pushed forward, forcing the raiders to retreat step by step. The people of the city, once mocking him, now stood in silence. They saw what she saw, a human who would not break. When the guards finally arrived, the raiders fled, leaving behind fear and smoke. He stood there, chest heaving, blood on his sleeve, eyes steady. The crowd whispered, their voices carrying shock and wonder. For the first time, she noticed her people looking at him not with mockery, but with respect. And something in her heart shifted like stone breaking apart. She rushed to him, anger hiding the storm inside her. "You fool! You could have died," she said, her voice trembling. He looked at her with a faint smile, his face pale from blood loss. "Better I fall than a child," he answered simply. Her lips parted, but no words came, because deep inside, she knew her people would never have said such words. They would have spoken of honor, of victory, of pride, but never of protecting the weak. That night she sat by his side as he rested. She cleaned his wound with careful hands, her mind a storm of questions. Why had he done this? Why risk his life for strangers? Why did her chest ache when she thought of him bleeding? She whispered to herself, "He is human, only human," yet her voice lacked strength. As he slept, she studied his face in the quiet moonlight. The calm lines, the faint scars, the tired strength that seemed endless. She realized that the man she once called weak had shown more courage than many of her warriors. And the walls around her heart began to shake. In the silence of that night, she admitted what she could never say aloud, that she was no longer certain of her people's truth, that the human she had been forced to marry was not her punishment. He was her test, and he was changing her more than any counsel or chain ever could. The days after the raid passed in a strange silence. The city still whispered about the human who fought like a warrior, and her people looked at him with new eyes. She walked beside him in the streets, and for the first time the sneers were fewer, the laughter weaker. Yet inside her heart, a storm was growing. She could not deny what she had seen, his strength, his courage, his refusal to back down, even when blood ran from his arm. But accepting it felt like betraying everything she had been taught since childhood. At night she found herself watching him, the way he sat in thought, the way he spoke little but with meaning. He did not boast about his fight, he did not claim honor, he did not demand respect. He acted as if nothing had changed, and that only made her confusion greater. One evening she asked, her voice sharp though curiosity hid beneath it. Why did you fight like that? Why did you risk your life for people who despise you? He looked at her quietly before answering. Because their hate does not matter, their lives do. His words struck her like an arrow, not because they were soft, but because they carried truth she had never dared to speak. Still, the walls in her heart stood strong. She told herself she must not give in. She must not forget her duty to her people. Her bloodline was ancient. Her loyalty demanded that she see humans as lesser. Yet every day with him tested those beliefs. She found herself remembering his smile when he helped children, his steady eyes when he faced danger, his calm voice when she tried to wound him with words. It was as if he lived by rules her people had forgotten, and that made her question everything. One night, as they shared a quiet meal, he spoke without looking at her. I know you did not choose this. I know you see me as your chain. She froze, her hand still, her chest tightening. He continued, his tone steady. But I will not treat you as a prisoner. You are free in all ways but name, and I will not break what little freedom you have left. She stared at him, stunned into silence. A husband in her people's culture was meant to demand, to control, to own, but here was a human offering her freedom, offering her dignity. The wall in her heart cracked just a little more. Later that night, she sat alone under the stars, her mind restless. She thought of her ancestors, warriors who bowed to no one. What would they say if they saw her now, sitting beside a human who carried no title yet showed more honor than many lords? Her pride battled with her heart, and for the first time she feared her pride might lose. The following day, whispers reached her ears. Enemies of her house spoke of using the human against her. They called him her weakness, a weapon to shame her further. She listened from the shadows, anger boiling in her veins. But mixed with that anger was something far more dangerous. Fear that they might harm him, not to punish him, but to wound her. And the thought of losing him, of seeing him fall, sent a chill through her that she could not explain. That evening, when he returned from a market, she stopped him at the door. Her voice was tense, her eyes unsteady. You know they will come for you. They will try to use you against me. He shrugged lightly, as if it did not matter. Then let them come, he said. I am not afraid. Her hands trembled, hidden in the folds of her cloak. She wanted to shout at him, to demand he stay safe, but the words caught in her throat. For if she spoke them, she would have to admit that she cared. The wall between them was still there, strong and heavy. Yet cracks spread through it like lightning across stone. Every day his kindness struck against it. Every moment of his quiet strength shook it. And she knew, deep inside, that the wall would not stand forever. As she lay awake that night, she whispered to herself, I cannot let him matter to me. But her heart answered in silence, beating faster every time she thought of his eyes, his voice, his hands reaching in a fire to save a child. And though she tried to deny it, she knew the truth. The human was no longer only her punishment. He was becoming her choice, and that terrified her more than any battle. The city tried to forget the raid, but whispers never faded. Her enemies had seen the truth with their own eyes, the human who fought like a warrior, and they hated it because it meant their insults carried less weight. They had mocked her for being forced into this bond, but now the people whispered of respect, even curiosity. To the enemies of her house, this was unacceptable. They needed to remind the council, the people, and her that a human was nothing. One night, she overheard their plans. They spoke in the shadows, their voices sharp. They think he is strong, but we will show them he is only fragile flesh. One said, we will break him before her eyes, and her shame will be complete. Another laughed. Her hands tightened into fists as she listened, her chest burning with fury. She wanted to storm into their circle and silence them, but she held back. If she revealed herself, they would strike sooner, and she needed to be ready. The next morning, she tried to warn him. They will come for you, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. He only looked at her calmly and asked, Do you fear for me? Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned away quickly, muttering, I fear what they will use you for. But deep inside, she knew the truth was different. She feared for him, for his life, for the strange place he had carved in her heart. Days later, the attack came. It happened at the edge of the marketplace, where the streets were narrow. The enemies of her house blocked the path, their weapons glinting in the light. The crowd scattered in fear, but she was trapped with him in the center. One of the men stepped forward, sneering. So, this is the human who thinks he is a warrior. Her blood boiled, but before she could answer, the human stepped forward, his voice steady. I do not think I am anything, he said, but I will not run. The fight was sudden and brutal. The enemies struck hard, their blades fast, but he met them with fearless resolve. He had no fine weapon, only a staff of wood. Yet he fought with every ounce of strength. Each strike he blocked shook his arms. Each blow he landed carried weight. The crowd gasped as the human held his ground against trained fighters. She stood frozen, torn between rushing to his side and letting him prove himself. Then one of the attackers turned his weapon toward her. Her eyes widened, but before the blade could fall, the human moved. He placed himself between her and the danger, taking the strike across his shoulder. Blood poured, and she felt her heart seize with terror. Her cry broke through the air, a sound she had never made before. He did not fall. He pushed forward, striking the attacker back with fury. Even wounded, he refused to let her be touched. The crowd's whispers turned to silence. They saw the human bleeding but unbroken, standing like a shield before his wife. Her chest trembled with emotions she could not name: pride, fear, anger, and something deeper. The attackers faltered, their confidence shaken by his will. And when the city guards finally arrived, the enemies fled, their threats echoing into the distance. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. You fool, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why would you take the blow from me? He looked at her, his face pale, but his eyes steady. Because no one touches you while I breathe, he said simply. Her breath caught, and tears stung her eyes though she fought to hide them. For the first time, she realized she was no longer afraid of what others would say. She was afraid of losing him. That night she sat by his side, refusing to leave. As he slept, weak from blood loss, she held his hand without thinking. The walls inside her heart, walls she had built with anger and pride, began to crumble. Her enemies had tried to use him as her weakness, but instead, they had revealed her truth. He was not her shame, he was her strength. And in the silence of the night, she whispered to herself, they will not take him from me. The wound on his shoulder healed slowly, but the memory of that night burned in her heart. She could still see the blade striking him, the blood pouring, the way he stood firm even as pain tore through him. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his words again. Because no one touches you while I breathe. Those words were no longer chains. They were fire, fire that melted her walls and left her bare. Her enemies had failed, but they were not gone. They whispered in the shadows, planning their next strike. Some of her own people came to her secretly, urging her to turn against the human. Leave him, they said. He is only flesh. He is nothing. Return to your house and restore your honor. But their words rang hollow in her ears. Honor had become a twisted mask to hide cruelty, and she could not forget the man who had bled for her. She found herself at a crossroad. One path led back to her people, to her pride, to the life she once knew. The other path was uncertain, filled with danger, but it was the path beside him. Her heart trembled with fear, but also with a strange strength she had never known. She realized that choosing him was not weakness, it was freedom. For the first time in her life, she had the power to decide her own bond. One evening, as the moons rose high, she sat beside him. He was quiet, his arms still bandaged, his eyes watching the sky. She gathered her courage and spoke. You trust me too much, she whispered. What if I betray you? What if I return to them? He turned his head, his gaze steady as always. Then I will still trust you, he said, because trust is not given by fear, it is given by choice. Her breath caught, her chest a storm of emotions. No one had ever given her such freedom. No one had ever looked at her not as property, not as a symbol, but as a person. That night, she could not sleep. She walked through the city streets, her cloak pulled tight, her mind heavy. Whispers followed her. Old allies called her a traitor. Others warned her to abandon him before it was too late. Yet when she imagined leaving, her heart ached like a wound that would never heal. She returned home before dawn, and when she saw him sleeping peacefully, the choice became clear. The next day, her enemies confronted her openly. They stood in the square, their voices loud, their eyes filled with venom. "You belong to us, not to a human," they shouted. "You carry our blood, and by our blood we demand your loyalty." The crowd gathered, waiting, watching, the air heavy with tension. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, her voice rising. "I carry your blood, but I carry my own will too," she said. Her enemies sneered, calling her dishonored, calling her broken. She lifted her head high, her eyes sharp. "I will not betray the one who stood for me when none of you did," she declared. Gasps filled the square. The people stared in shock. Her enemies shouted in fury. "You choose him over us, over your people." She answered without fear. "I could choose the truth over lies. I choose the man who bled for me, not the cowards who hide behind words of honor." The silence that followed was heavy. Some turned their heads in shame. Others whispered in anger. But she no longer cared for their judgment. For the first time, she was not speaking as their pawn, but as her own voice. And when she looked at the human, standing quietly behind her, she saw pride in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. That night, as they sat alone, she told him softly, "They will come again, stronger than before, and now they will call me traitor." He reached for her hand, not with force, but with quiet strength. "Then we face them together," he said. Her chest ached, but not with pain, with something deeper, something she had once sworn she would never feel. She realized her choice was not only about loyalty, it was about love. And though she feared what was to come, she no longer feared the truth. She was his, not by force, not by chains, but by her own heart. The city could not remain silent after her choice. The council gathered, the streets filled with whispers, and her enemies spread their venom with louder voices. They claimed she had betrayed her blood. They claimed the human had bewitched her. But none of their words could erase what the people had seen with their own eyes. They had seen him stand against raiders. They had seen him bleed to protect her. They had seen her defy the chains of pride for him. The tension grew until the breaking point. Her enemies returned, this time not with hidden blades, but with open war. They gathered supporters, raising banners, shouting that the human must die. The council hesitated, afraid to choose, for they knew that the people were divided. Some still clung to old hate, but others had begun to admire the strange courage of the man they once mocked. When the attack came, it was at dawn. The sky glowed red as fire spread through the lower streets. She stood beside him, her cloak whipping in the wind, her heart steady. He gripped a spear, his wounded shoulder still aching, yet his stance unshaken. They faced the enemy together, not as strangers forced into a bond, but as two souls bound by choice. The battle was fierce, steel against steel, fire against stone. She fought with the skill of her ancestors, her blade flashing, her voice a cry of defiance. Beside her, the human moved with unyielding resolve, his strikes heavy, his defense unbreakable. They covered each other, step by step, their movements flowing as if guided by the same heartbeat. And as the people watched, they saw not shame, but unity, not weakness, but strength. At one moment, when the enemy tried to overwhelm her, he stepped forward, shielding her with his body once again. But this time she did not let him stand alone. She pushed beside him, her blade cutting down their foes, her voice ringing, No more chains, no more lies. I fight with him, not against him. The words shook the battlefield. The people gasped, and even the council could not deny what they had witnessed. When the dust settled, the enemies were broken, their banners torn, their pride shattered. The people gathered in silence, staring at the unlikely pair who still stood together, bruised but unbroken. And in that silence, something changed. For the first time, her people bowed their heads, not to her alone, but to the human at her side. She turned to him, her chest trembling with feelings she could no longer deny. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. They forced me to marry you. They thought it would be my punishment. Her eyes softened, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. But you have stirred something deeper, something I never expected. He looked at her, his face calm, yet filled with quiet warmth. I did not come to take your heart, he said gently, but I will protect it if you give it to me. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to hide them. For she realized the truth at last. She was no longer bound by council law or family pride. She was bound by choice, by respect, by love that had grown like fire from ashes. She reached for his hand, not with hesitation, but with certainty. And when their fingers touched, she felt the final wall in her heart crumble into nothing. The crowd watched in silence, some in awe, some in disbelief. But none could deny the truth. The daughter of warriors had chosen a human, and together they had turned shame into triumph. In that moment, history itself shifted. What began as punishment had become a story that would be told for generations. Not of defeat, but of a bond stronger than chains, stronger than blood, stronger than war. And as the night fell, she stood beside him, her voice carrying across the city. They forced me to marry a human, but he stirred feelings I never expected. The words echoed into the darkness, sealing their story not as tragedy, but as victory.